Welcome everyone to this first event on visualizing care. I'm Jocelyn Alcott. I'm a professor of history and international and comparative studies, and I currently serve as the director of the program in gender, sexuality, and feminist studies here at Duke University. I am joining you from the unceded tribal territories of several First Nations, including the Halawa-Saponi, the Tuscarora, the Wakamasiwin, and the Catawba peoples. I am right now, as we speak, putting the links in the, I think I put links in the chat box. I encourage you all to learn more about the histories and cultures and current activities of all of these First Nations peoples. The event today forms part of an ongoing international interdisciplinary collaboration on revaluing care in the global economy. I'm going to put the link also for that in the chat. Sorry, I can't talk and type at the same time. Revaluing Care in the Global Economy is a project that we launched a couple of years ago. We focus in this project on three principal areas: metrics, so how to measure care and how it affects care when we try to measure it; governance, how laws and policies both reflect normative values of care; and social practices, so how various practices and social formations inform attention to care. We've also started from two fundamental premises that have become even more evident in the current moment. First, that social, cultural, and ecological care are all interdependent and imbricate. And secondly, that innovative solutions to the so-called crisis of care can be found in many corners of the world, particularly in those that have been most suspicious of technology-based solutions. Today's event forms part of a new, launches a new series that we've dubbed Visualizing Care. Link again in the chat box. This is a project that stems not only from a long-standing feminist efforts to make time, labor, attention, and expertise for care, but also from a discomfort with our own efforts to represent care without reinscribing naturalized and common-sensical conceptions of what constitutes care and what care implies. Working with several members of our group here at Duke, particularly the artist Lauren Henschel, the anthropologist Yang-Ping Ni, and the feminist theorist Tanya Rispoli, we decided to turn to artists to help us familiarize our understanding of care and help us develop new sensory and lexical vocabularies for representing care. Each event in this series, including today's launch event, also includes an online exhibit selected from the works that were submitted in response to call for submissions. This exhibit, which you can access through that Visualizing Care link, will be available. This particular installation will be available through May 10th, and we'll have more panels and exhibits going on through this coming year. So we encourage you to go visit that exhibit before it comes down on the 10th of May. I want to say how thrilled we are to have this event following on two wonderful events that took place earlier this month around similar questions of queering communities of care. First was a wonderful talk by Joshua Chambers-Letson, who delivered this year's annual Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick Queer Theory Lecture, and then a really fascinating panel last Friday on queer kinship. An animating question behind our larger research project has centered on how we describe the boundaries of communities of care and ways we might reimagine the social practices that establish and sometimes police those boundaries. Queer studies and queer theory have, over the past decades, particularly pressed the question of how we understand our communities and the kinship structures that undergird them, yielding challenging but generative ideas about what a more careful society would look like. If you're interested in learning more about the research network and our projects, please put your email address in the chat. In addition to the Visualizing Care series, which will be ongoing, this summer we're going to have a two-day workshop that is part of a collaboration with the University of Exeter's Wellcome Center on the Cultures and Environments of Health, which will explore a cluster of themes, including this question of the communities of care. The workshop will be entirely online and very and interactive. We'll welcome all interested participants, and it will include artists, activists, and practitioners, as well as researchers. The Revaluing Care in the Global Economy project has enjoyed broad support at Duke. We particularly want to thank the program in Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies and the Mellon-funded Humanities Unbounded program, which has not only supported the Revaluing Care in the Global Economy lab, but was quite open to allowing us to reorient the lab toward this Visualizing Care series. So I'm deeply grateful about their openness to this reimagining of the project. GSF and Humanities Unbounded, of course, are not simply offices, but rather people who do all the work that makes these events possible. I particularly want to thank Laura Eastwood from Humanities Unbounded and Julie Winmore and Amanda Archambault from GSF. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists today, two visiting artists and two wonderful colleagues here at Duke, one of whom is also an artist and the other certainly quite creative in his own right. In the interest of time, I'll be brief in my introductions here, but I'm going to put the links for all of these participants in the chat box so you can learn more about all their amazing work on your own time. First, we have Gabriel Garcia Roman, and I'm going to just, while I'm here, put his a link to some of his amazing work right here. Sorry, everyone in the meeting. Gabriel Garcia Roman is a multidisciplinary artist and craftsman born in Zacatecas, Mexico, and raised in Chicago's Northwest Side. He examines and decodes the politics of identity through intricate and process-based work, which has been shown in exhibits and galleries across the United States. In 2018, he was a recipient of the National Association of Latino Art and Culture's Artist Grant. In 2019, he was commissioned by the Leslie Lohman Museum to bring his Queer Icon series to the streets for the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. And last year, Garcia Roman was one of 10 artists in residence at the Lower Manhattan Council for Workspace. Devynn Emory, and I will put Devynn's link right here as well. Devynn Emory, who uses the pronouns they and them, is mixed Lenape, Blackfoot, gender, transgender choreographer, body worker, ceremonial guide, acute care and hospice nurse, currently working as a COVID-19 nurse in New York City. Emory's performance company, Devynn Emory and Beast Productions, draws from their multiple in-between states of being, holding space for liminal bodies, bridging multiple planes of transition. Their formal dance training pulls on mathematical and map scores to support bodies decolonizing and bleeding human truths, opening peepholes and revelations for collective performers and audiences. They're currently working on a trilogy centering on medical mannequins processing transitional mediumship. Dead Bird, and I'm going to again put this work is really just also amazing. So I encourage you to take a look when you have a chance. Dead Bird, with its touring public altar, Can Anyone Help Me Hold This Body, is currently on tour. And the next installation, Cindy Sessions and Boiling Rain, are interactive storytelling projects with an elder mannequin holding a collection of grandmother wisdom. As a healer, Emory has dual licenses in Western and Eastern bodywork and runs a private sage massage that offers end-of-life consultation, channeled counseling, and hands-on care modalities in conversation with thresholds. Okay, Pedro Lasch, one of our discussants here, is a US and Mexico-based visual artist and a professor of art history, and visual studies here at Duke, where he also directs the Franklin Humanities Institute Social Practices Lab. His art has been shown at the Phillips Collection, Creative Time, MoMA PS1, Mass MoCA, National Palace Gallery in Mexico City, Prospect 4 Triennial in New Orleans, the 6th Guangzhou Biennial, the 12th Havana Biennial, Documenta 13, the 56th Venice Biennial, and he is also the author of several works, including, he's the author of several books, excuse me. His work has also appeared in numerous catalogs, as well as journals such as October Magazine, Saber Ver, Art Forum, Art News, Cultural Studies, the New York Times, and La Jornada. His online pedagogical work, Art of the MOOC, and all, you can find this stuff through his website. It's it's really fantastic. His Art of the MOOC has over 55,000 enrolled participants in 134 countries since it launched in 2015. And last but not least, my dear colleague Pete Sigal, and I will put his information in the chat as well, is a professor of history and gender, sexuality, and feminist studies here at Duke University. His research and teaching focus on the history of sexuality, Latin American history, and the relationship between colonialism and sexual pleasure. He is the author of From Moon Goddesses to Virgins, The Colonization of Yucatec Mayan Sexual Desire, and of the prize-winning book, The Flower and the Scorpion, Sexuality, Ritual, and Early Nahua Culture, a study on the interaction of writing and sexual representation in 16th and 17th century indigenous Nahua societies, Mexico. He is also the editor of Infamous Desire, Male Homosexuality in Colonial Latin America, and with Zeb Tortorici and the late Neil Whitehead, Ethnopornography, Sexuality, Colonialism, and Archival Knowledge, a wide-ranging study of the relationships between colonial and ethnographic gaze and sexuality throughout the world. Pete is currently completing a study of colonial sexual desire called, maybe tentatively titled, Sustaining Sexual Pleasure, A History of Colonial and Post-Colonial Voyeurism, that considers 4 vantage points to understand the relationship between the colonial gaze and post-colonial notions of pleasure, the naked native in the colonial circum-Caribbean, Sarah Bartman, the so-called Hottentot Venus, Black leather, black skin, and black men in Robert Mapplethorpe's photographs, and Black and Latino men in hardcore pornography in the United States. Sigal has moved from studying sexual desires in indigenous communities to examining the colonial cultural processes that create global concepts of modern sexuality, gender, masculinity, and femininity. So without further ado, we're going to turn to the presentations. Gabriel and Devynn will each present for about 10 to 15 minutes, followed by a conversation with Pete and Pedro. We encourage our audience members to intervene when we get to the discussion portion of the program, either by raising your hand or by typing into the chat box. We can unmute you. I can't, but there's the host can unmute you to allow you then to turn on your mic and if you'd like to ask your question yourself. I do want to indicate though that we're recording this session, and so if you decide to ask your question in person, you'll be included on the recording. So just fair warning if you're in your PJs or whatever. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Gabriel. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jocelyn, for that amazing introduction. And I'm super excited to be included in this panel with Devynn, Pete, and Pedro. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of my projects. But before I do that, I'm going to share my screen so I could do the slideshow here. All right, so just as Jocelyn had mentioned, I'm a multimedia artist and craftsman, mostly working in portraiture. So most of my work starts on from the personal level. It's usually something that I'm trying to explore about myself. It's either, about my identity or my community, and also visual representation in general. So today I'm going to talk to you about queer icons. Queer icons is a body of work it's an ongoing portrait series that I've been working on since 2011, I believe. So a little bit about that is that I went to school at a later age. So I was a student, towards 2011, I was already about to graduate in art history and studio art. So I was taking a lot of art history courses, and at the same time, around the same time, there was a big push on marriage equality, and queer representation was a really big thing in the media around the same time. So with all of this happening at the same time, I noticed one thing, and I noticed that my community wasn't being represented in the discussions or the conversations that were happening around the same time. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to insert our narrative, our stories in a visual project, and Queer Icons is what came out of that. So just as I mentioned, Queer Icons is a portrait series that's highlighting the wide spectrum of queer folks of color. And so queer folks of color, so I'm just going to keep on going through some of the images. So as I mentioned, it's a portrait series that highlights the queer community. And so one of the things that I wanted to do within the series is highlight members of the community as noble and proud individuals and defiant, which is also not often represented in the media or in the media. So that was, I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous, so bear with me a little bit. I don't know why this happens to me all the time, even though I do this often. But sorry, let me just get some water. yeah, so what I wanted to do with this series started with me photographing my friends and my friends of friends. And like I said, I wanted to create a body of work that included queer folks of color. And as I was working on this project, I kept noticing that as I was showing this work, people were still wondering, like, who is behind these portraits? Who are these folks? And so this project started getting pretty big. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to hone in on a particular section of the queer community of color. So what I started doing is I started highlighting specifically activist community organizers and artists, poets, basically folks that are doing work for the community, doing highlighting issues that affect specifically communities of color, like over policing of Black and brown bodies, talking about prison systems and sex workers, and also even simply as like owning our own bodies and loving ourselves, which is not often represented or talked about. And so one other thing is that, so I grew up Catholic, and I'm not sure if you noticed, but I grew up Catholic. And so to me, religious art was my introduction to art. As a young kid, I would go to church, and instead of paying attention to the priest, I was always mesmerized by all of the art that was surrounding me in these cathedrals and in church, whether it was like these ornate wooden frames or the murals and portraits of the saints that line the walls. So that aesthetic, or that has always been part of me, or has always been inside of me. And I decided that that's sort of what I wanted to use in this series. I've always seen the halo as sort of like a badge of honor, right? Because it's like saints are all folks, common day folks that did something for the betterment of the community, and that was how they basically earned their halo. And that's what I wanted to incorporate in the series. And when I first started the project, like I mentioned, people would ask me who these folks were. And I know that when I go into a gallery or a museum and I look at a portrait, I am the one who's, if I don't read the placard, I'm the one who's creating the narrative for this person. And already as a community that's disenfranchised and often erased in silence, I thought that I was in a way doing a disservice by not talking about, or by not including their voices in the work. And so what I started doing is I started incorporating or asking the person whose portrait it is to write around their portrait. So all the text you see surrounding their portrait is actually handwritten by the person. And that was another thing that I wanted to do, is I wanted to personalize each print by including their handwriting, because to me, like, hands and handwriting are really personal. And obviously their musings or their text, whatever they write, is also as personal. And like I mentioned earlier, the way I positioned each in the series is like, I wanted them to look out to the viewer defiantly, because, as a community that's often erased, I wanted them to look out into the viewer and saying, like, no matter what happens, no matter what obstacles you place in front of us, we're still here and we're still alive, and thriving. So along with that, because it's an ongoing series, I often change or add elements to the project. So I also started making my own frames, again, recalling these Rococo frames that I would see in cathedrals. And so I'm just taking my, putting my spin into each of the prints. And I also started incorporating a little bit of embroidery. So there's an embroidered heart. And also with representation, oftentimes even different body types are excluded in art in general. So I also was very specific in choosing some of the folks that participated. A lot of folks that are doing a lot of work on body positivity, I felt was very important to be included. And different folks who are doing work specifically for the community, for the Black community, and also speaking of just different issues that are affecting the community. And one of the things that I'd like to talk about or mention is that the words that are written around the portrait is something that I let the participant just take control of how they want to lay out the images. So here, for example, these are twin sisters from the Bay Area who run the African American Cultural Museum in San Francisco. They both wrote about their identity or about their journey, and one wrote on one side and the other one wrote on the other side. So we wanted to still at the same time keep it separate. So that's why I chose two different inks on this. Also, I call this one the Sigal Familia because it's a beautiful narrative, or it's a beautiful representation that's not often shown, to queer folks of color raising a child together. And I thought it was really important to include that this one was the most recent print that I've worked on. And often, also a lot of times people are not clear as how the work is done. So what I wanted to do is I'm going to show a little process video of the work. It's a frame-making process. It's a photogravure. So it's work, all the color that you saw in the prints are all decorative paper that's collaged onto the print. And so you'll see a little time lapse of the here it's a metal plate that I'm inking, and I'm rubbing off all of the ink. And one of the things that I love about this series is that I get to work with my hands, and each action that I do, as far as like either inking the plate and rubbing the ink off and putting the wheat paste and even making the cutouts, they're all like meditations that I do as I'm working on these prints, and sort of like bringing in like my energy and my love and my passion for my community into each print. So that's why I always think it's important for me to show the video, just to show the the labor intense that goes into the work. And one last slide that I wanted to show was, as it was mentioned earlier, in 2019, I was invited by Leslie Lohman Museum to bring my work to the streets for the Pride March that happened, which happened to be the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. And so I wanted to show a little, a little video of the series on the streets. So there was about 100 of these flags that were flown through the streets on Fifth Avenue in New York City. Yeah, so that's the end of my slideshow and talk. So, and here you can see a lot of the work, the frameworks in my background here. So thank you, and Devynn.
Thank you, dear. What a beautiful sharing you offered all of us. This is really our first time meeting, but I feel connected to you already. And anytime I see a display of our people, you know, being resilient and joyous, I'm just so moved and grateful. And, you know, my work is often about caring for folks who have passed. And this last project is also about including those who are grieving those who have passed. So who's remaining earthside and how to tend to each other. So I'd love to keep talking to you about your work. So thank you. And thank you for holding us all this very warm introduction. I am, as everyone introduced me so warmly, a choreographer and a dancer first. I'm also a healer. I guide ritual and ceremonial space. I'm a massage therapist. And I'm a registered nurse. I work in critical care and acute care and also hospice. And this past year I've been a COVID nurse. Currently working in the vaccine center, just bouncing around in the moment. So I'm going to share also similar to Gabriel, just one project. Currently working on a project called Dead Bird. Dead Bird was a live performance scheduled right before the pandemics of this moment began. There's many dancers and live musicians. It was scheduled here in Lenape-Hoking in New York City. And after everything closed, I decided I wanted to document that work, and it kind of became more of itself. It became its essential self as a film. And that film, if you watch it, you're guided towards the end to a map and an invitation to go to a public grief altar in one of 4 cities across Turtle Island, traveling from east to west in the US. And if you are not in one of those touring cities, there's a website that holds the entire project that you can also build an altar, a grief altar for yourself at home. And then the project ends with an archive, a national archive, or really a global archive, because you can really access it from anywhere to build an altar, make an offering, photograph that offering, and upload it into this archived space. So also kind of responding specifically to Black and Indigenous folks who are passing right now in great numbers. Being on the front lines as a COVID nurse has really exacerbated that for me and my work. So I'm grateful that this project has been able to hold me as well as hold all my kin to kind of process. So I will begin sharing my screen. So this is just my website. I think I shared plenty about my work. The first image you're going to see, as you heard in the introduction, I began working with medical mannequins when I was introduced to them in nursing school. So medical mannequins and I have a different kind of kindredship that allows my kind of in-between body as a mixed race person, Indigenous person, a trans person, and a person who often communicates with spirit in the spirit world and does a lot of mediumship for myself and others. Medical mannequins are also this kind of uncanny valley, abject-object relations person who I really related to in nursing school as someone who was already coming in as an activist and pretty aware of the cultural gaps and racism that was about to come my way in, quote, Western medical training. And so I hung out with these medical mannequins quite a bit and ended up teaching with them around cultural sensitivity, around trans population, how to take care of trans population, how to take care of different economic backgrounds and racial backgrounds. So folks at least had a sense of it before they then went into the general public, into the hospital system, because of course that wasn't really covered in our training. So here's one of my first friends, my mannequin friends is what I call them. This is Billy. So you can see here, you can kind of inject medication in, you can pull medication out. This is where I learned chest compressions. I learned how to do post-mortem care. I delivered a robot baby, so I did some care, you know, doing pre and postnatal care. This is me in the simulation lab. So you're kind of placed in this gorgeous proscenium, or like performance box is what I kind of felt with this medical mannequin, really practicing on this in-between being. And for me, I took it quite seriously. I really related to their energy, as well as I understood acutely that it was great to practice on an object. However, it was really important to take that seriously, because I didn't want us new nurses to be then taking what we learned, practicing care on an object, to then, of course, practicing that same way when we're with living, breathing humans. Obviously, there's a lot of that in the hospital system. So wanting to kind of breathe some life into these mannequins. This is the beginning stage of the project I'm working on now, called Dead Bird. So this is a mannequin that I purchased for the project. These are dancers, Angie Pittman and Jules Skloot, who were two of the original dancers in the live performance. This is us. We did a lot of practice around our own cultural lineages of death ritual. And then a lot of rehearsal was kind of coming back together and practicing different care models with this mannequin. And for me, I think it was a balm for me to kind of extend time a little bit and extend space and kind of create the kind of care model, or the kind of care team that I would wish each of my actual patients in the system had. And so it kind of became this balm for me after I got off my long, 17-hour shifts, to kind of come to rehearsal and kind of do a different way and invite other people into kind of thinking about death with me. This was just a performance at the Chocolate Factory here in New York City. This never made it to the show, but this is just us kind of moving through certain care rituals that, again, come from our own lineages. So in the waiting room, you were invited to bring an offering to this mannequin who, in the live performance, passes away. So this is the beginning of what is now called Can Anybody Help Me Hold This Body, which is the public grief altar that I mentioned that now is traveling across Turtle Island. So this is the beginning stages of thinking, oh, we need to make an altar to honor this body who's passed in the live performance. And it began with kind of staging some objects and offerings that people could bring in, as well as their own. They're welcome to, of course, bring their own. And this is an example of kind of early stages practice of building that altar. This is the barn that I shot some of the film Dead Bird in. You can watch Dead Bird on the site when it's in one of the touring cities, kind of simulating a performance experience, or after the tour is over, you can watch it on your own. This is a shot and a still from the film. When Manny, I don't want to give any spoiler alerts, but Manny kind of transitions. And this is a brief 1-minute trailer that I'll share with you. and hopes that you'll join us in our next touring city, which is Portland. Great. So this is myself and Joseph Pierce, my kin from the Cherokee Nation. This is the beginning ritual that was just for us and the land before we opened the first altar, which was in Prospect Park here in Lenapehoking. So there are altar tenders in each city tending to each of the public grief altars for about 3 days. And I'm considering this a land project also. I've only invited BIPOC folk to tend to the altar with me as a way to not only hold space for other people's grief, including the person who passes in the film, everyone who's passed in the pandemics of racism and COVID, but who have passed before and who might pass in the future, but also so we get a chance for a few days to have the land hold us and to then us offer back to the land. So Joseph and I had a daily ritual with the land to kind of give thanks to supporting us with this project. Here's us grinding some corn before we offer it to the water, before the ritual is concluded and the audience is welcome to come make an offering. So sitting here. This is one of the many signs that you would see when you come to the altar. The tagline for the altar is "Our grief can be holy if we let it," to kind of have an invitation into all of us who are grieving right now. It's a way, it started as a way for me to be unalone in my own grief as a nurse. And then of course, COVID expanded that and connected a lot of us and also exacerbated the disparities of, racial disparities, economic disparities, who has access, of course, after they get out of the hospital, if they make it, to still have a home left, still have a job left. I feel like this whole conversation can just be about decolonizing care, but I will pause on that in hopes that we can get into some of it. These are some of the objects that a dear artist friend of mine gold leaf pressed. And again, I don't want to give a spoiler alert. One of the people who in the film really loves gold leaf pressed items. And so we pressed these items for the altar as a starter pack for each altar that I ship to each altar tender as a kind of way to begin the process. And then again, inviting the public in. This is a photo from one of the last days of the altar in New York. And then we moved to Philadelphia. This is my dear kin, Jumitatu Po, who tended in Bartram's Garden, which is a community garden space that currently is doing a lot of mutual aid in this moment. So I thought it was perfect. I have a big relationship with them and I've spent a lot of time, as Philadelphia is my home. So Philadelphia, of course, really different culture, really different space. Each city it travels to is going to have a lot of different needs. And so the project kind of bends and flexes to each altar tender as well as each community present there. And this is the archive online. So again, after you watch the film, after you go to an altar or create one on your own, you're welcome to upload a photo of your offering to the archive. So this is a way for all of us to stay connected across Turtle Island and beyond to visualize each other's offering and their space to write a little text for who the offering is for, including yourself. And that's it for now. This is my website at the top if you'd like to visit. And then below is the project website. And thanks very much. I will open it to the rest of us. I can't wait to be in conversation with you all.
So, wow. So Pedro and I just flipped a coin, and I lost, so I get to follow up on those two amazing and just such moving talks, and so we're going to engage in Pedro and I are essentially going to lead off a discussion. We have some questions and some ways of thinking through some of these things. And to me, right, queer icons is just stunning in its beauty and its message. And I think everyone was touched as you were going through that, Gabriel. And Dead Bird is also stunning, but goes in such a different direction for me, at least, right? It queers grief, and right, which is seen as, in our world, in the Western world, certainly seen as a negative here, but it's into a movement towards, or Devynn makes it into a movement towards a livable future for BIPOC queer subjects, and so it again is extraordinarily stunning. So while at first, to me, we see these as two very different projects in so many ways. One of the comments in the chat was, as Gabriel was talking, is that this brings me so much joy, and Gabriel's work is about joy in so many ways, whereas Devynn's work is so much about grief. Yet I think in putting these two together, in a lot of ways, we break down that that sort of binary division here, and we break that down, in my opinion, by queering care. And so I guess I want to start us off by asking us to think about this concept of what it means to queer care, because it's and so for both of you, it seems to me that one of the key things that your works have in common is a sense of queering care through the creation of a future world, and that's something that we have seen artists is trying to struggle with for the past generation. What you do, I think, is develop ideas for a livable world for queer and trans people, and whether that means coping with grief and using that grief to create a sort of alternative world, even a post-human world, or at least that's the way I read the Dead Bird there, or considering the concept of the icon and developing an interactive framework for that icon to speak beyond the subjectivity of the individual. It's that interaction that I find so moving there. You both develop senses of a queer future that seems to me fundamentally about caring in the broadest sense for a queer community, offering a sense of care here. And so I guess I want to ask you what queering care means to you, and open the conversation there.
I guess I could go first. Queering care for me is definitely like a chosen family, right? Basically like counting on each other when we have nobody else to fall back on. Like, we create our own communities amongst friends, and like I think to me that's really important, and it's always been important to me, is the idea of chosen families. And I couldn't go to my family to talk about issues that I was going through as a kid or, you know, as a teenager. And so it was always important for me to look for people, elders who are going through or have gone through what I'm going through. So that's always been a big part of in my eyes, queering care in that sense.
I feel like this is a conference question. It's such a huge question, and I will do my best briefly. But I've been thinking so much about queering care and decolonizing care and how we're separating them sometimes, and how they were just really one question for me. And maybe that's because I'm in the hospital so often right now that, you know, as an Indigenous person, we're being really re-traumatized after understanding, like, deep in our DNA and our lineages are viruses being intentionally introduced to eradicate our peoples. And now here we are again, and I'm on the front lines watching Black and Indigenous people being wiped out left and right, and, you know, being a nurse, you know, being puppeted to choosing whose body's going to survive and who's going to get the, you know, machine next. And it's really a big moment. So for me, I think queering care is also decolonizing care, and is also having us all acknowledge and invite everyone into acknowledging that history and how it's sounds like a Brooklyn window, Gabriel.
Yeah.
So, you know, inviting everyone into decolonizing work. And because I think without that, we kind of can't start thinking, what is a different way to care, without understanding that history and how that history is now. And it's, and so when I think about that, I think about all the capitalist structures that we are living in, which before that, of course, was becomes colonization structures. So I think having the time to recenter our nervous systems is a big way I think about queering care. So I think that's why I'm working in this realm and making this project, because I think slowing down and creating a project that hires and pays BIPOC people to have a chance to slow down and have a chance to be with grief is, I think what Gabriel's doing is creating a more resilient queer and trans body earthside, because without that time for us to be processing the grief, we also will risk being very ill as we're living.
Yeah, well, I think I'll add, you know, some questions and comments, but thank you both for such amazing work that you not only are sharing today, but I did spend some time with your websites, and it's just incredible, all the different works that you do, particularly because, you know, you make the art, but you also care directly for people. You know, there's other artists who make work about care, but don't spend time on the caring as much. And it's obvious that you both do. In your case, Devynn, directly in kind of that physical practice of healthcare, but also Gabriel, like what we saw your last video of the work in the streets, I consider that very much the work of care, right? Bringing communities together through art. And it's not just the art, it's the organizing. It's like making sure the logistics, all that stuff is care, you know, and you're clearly so involved in it. So it's an honor to be with you both. And, you know, so I wanted to kind of bring into, I have lots of ideas, but for maybe we'll put them in gradually so that, but I'd love to hear you both talk about, I think, this concept of queering care, but also the fact that you're both artists brings us to a concept that is so pervasive in at least Western art, and it's the idea of individualism, right? We get so indoctrinated with this notion that artists are egomaniacal individualists, you know? And of course, even that, if that's very far from the truth in most cases, at least in my experience, that is the myth, that is the story we get told. And it's still what gets perpetuated in art education and art schools and so on. And you're, of course, both taking such a direct stance against it, but you do it in very different ways, you know? So Gabriel, you always talk to the people you portray, but at the end of the day, you make the portrait, right? And in your case, Devynn, you collaborate with people directly, right? Often they perform with you, but also there's this icon of you and the mannequin which is this interesting kind of portrait of a troubling, relationship to individualism, right? Of your history of practicing with these mannequins, So I'd love to hear you both talk a little bit about that, and also about the concept of conventions. I think in your case, Gabriel, you play a lot with, you defy conventions within both church doctrine and artistic doctrine by doing what you're not, including the people that have been excluded by both art and church, but in other ways, you actually play with it. You totally welcome the convention and celebrate it, right? The halo, the hand. I love how you use the different hand gestures of of that kind of history. And in your case, Devynn, I feel like there's this really difficult question with grief when communities, for example, with lovers and partners who don't belong to heteronormative relationships. When someone passes, society has no convention, no ritual, no ceremony, right? To how to deal with that. And so I really kind of, and so my question to you is, like, what conventions, what language have you been able to produce with your collaborators to deal with that absence of convention, right? From heteronormative society. Because ritual kind of does require some convention, right? So that people even know what they're doing with the altar, and so, but you're kind of making it as you go, or from what you learn from the communities that have been erased historically. So I'm really curious to learn more about your process.
I've got a loud Brooklyn thing going on too, so go ahead, Gabriel.
Thanks, Pedro, for that question. So I guess the first thing I would talk about, or want to talk about, is, I guess, the religious aspect, or how I'm borrowing and celebrating aspects of it. So yeah, like I said earlier, I was indoctrinated into Catholicism at a young age, and to me, it's always, like, in a way, the imagery has always kind of scared me a little bit, but also there was also a lot of mystery behind it, and I've always been fascinated and drawn to it. So when I had my opportunity to highlight a community that's often erased, I thought, like, it's very important, or I thought it was important for me to borrow aesthetics from the religious iconography, like the hand gestures, and even like a lot of the clothing, as far as like cloaks and robes, and using a lot of textures and patterns just to show the richness, of our community. And the halo, again, it's like, it to me has always been like this thing that you earn because of actions that you've done. So again, I just borrowed that idea and incorporated it into my work. And also, and with the frames, also celebrating, just encasing these delicate prints and this delicate community into these frames that are really ornate and take a lot of labor to create. And in a way, like, I oftentimes see my work, or me working on it, as like, how monks just spend their lifetime working on something, and that's sort of how I see it, where I'm like, all the sanding that I do to make the frames, and all of the blocks to glue each piece individually, it's like all the care and attention that my community rarely gets. Like, I want to imbue that into every single piece that I make. And so that's that, in a way, that's how I operate with a lot of my work, specifically with this work in particular. And also highlighting, again, like a community that's often erased. And with all of the prints that I do make, I'm very particular about where I'm going to show the work and who gets to see it, or who gets to use the image. I don't really sell prints or show or sell digital prints, again, because I am very, there's something in me that says like, I don't want to make money off of somebody else's image, specifically already a community that is often used, you know, as like a photo op or as like a poster for something. I'm very protective of my community and very protective of the work that I make. So again, I am very specific about who gets to see this, or not gets to see it because it's online, so everybody gets to see it. But as far as like the rights to the image or whatever, and if I do sell a print, I'm very transparent with the person and make sure that they get a portion of the money that gets, you know, with the transaction or whatever. So I'm very intentional about that for sure.
Yeah, really relating to what you're saying. I want to be really careful and intentional too. And it's kind of, I relate to you in the ways that we kind of are reclaiming space a little bit for our communities before it's kind of being taken from us. I think for me, in working a lot with grief, there's an assumption, I think, that gets absorbed from kind of like a white capitalist society, that grief is hard and heavy only. And there is so much joy and celebrating sometimes from various cultures, including my own, including being a trans person. A lot of trans folks in my life who've passed, there's a big release, you know. We're not always ready to hold trans bodies in this plane in a really honorable way. And so there can be some kind of release and understanding that there's a transformation happening, that they might be in less suffering in some way. And as an activist, I feel like we already know a lot of ways to kind of do differently. And by modeling this in everything I do, I think I'm always practicing and introducing how to not remodel a hierarchy of being the one who's a knower. Like I really try to not be like, yes, I'm a nurse. Yes, I'm a massage therapist with all these different degrees. But I think in all my practices, they're all hands on. Wow, that was a lot of talking to mute. Oh, okay, let me try it over. Can you hear me now? Awesome. So I was talking about grief and this assumption that grief is like only a hard and heavy thing, right? And that's often like absorbed in white culture, that it's like scary and we shouldn't look at it, and it's only heavy and we only look at it at the moment of crisis when a person dies, and otherwise we're not talking about it. So I feel like a lot of my work, my calling is to help us all talk about death and grief in a way that's way before the moment of crisis. So it's integral to our understanding of change and cycles, which I think is also kind of a decolonized way of understanding the natural world around us that shows us every day that it's changing. So just having that in our daily routine, and also kind of decentering myself as the expert. I think as a nurse and a massage therapist and a ritual guide, I think people can kind of put me up in this way of being the knower. And I really just don't think that that's the way that any of us are going to move forward towards understanding death and grief and even joy and resiliency. Because I think, you know, in my massage practice, I often work towards empowering folks who are on my table to understand and learn more about their own bodies. I don't want to just be the fixer of your body, you feel better and you leave. I want to give you some tools so you can continue your own care and even potentially pass that care on to someone else. And it's an honor to be able to pass those tools that I've had the privilege to study and give to another. And I feel that way as a nurse also. Of course, we've all been in a situation and hospital setting where we don't understand all the medical language. So to really care for not just the patient, but the family systems, and trying to stretch time a little bit to help everyone understand what's going on. And so they can, you know, care for each other when that person hopefully is discharged or has a big, you know, diagnosis, and then they're going home and their whole life has changed. Like how to really create education and support around that family, not just at the moment they leave the hospital, but ongoing care. And I think that there's really, I'm not sure if this was shared earlier because I was on mute, but as a trans person, there's a lot of relief and release sometimes in transition, and I feel really comfortable in transition. Again, at the moment of person passing, that's kind of an in-between space that I'm really familiar with. As a trans person, I'm not so nervous around that space, and also a lot of people can be relieved of this one vessel of their body as we know it, and be transcended into another vessel or another being, an embodiment that might be a little bit less of a struggle, as we as a society don't always hold trans folks and folks of color in a way that's really honorable that we need. So I think a question I get a lot too is like, how do I practice ritual that's non-appropriative? And like, is this for me? And that's something I really, with can anybody help me hold this body? I'm taking into consideration. Some folks have been like, oh, I'm X religion, I don't think I should come. In this way that I'm like, death and dying and grief isn't, there's no religion here. We all have an opportunity. In fact, I invite us all to practice all the time. And some of it, of course, is these queer, gorgeous queer love letters, because some of the people that I'm inviting come from my community. But there's also, people leave their mother's ashes, and I what an honor to feel like this is, I finally found a space for this, and it's not even for me. It's this now object gets to meet this object, and then there's a community amongst the objects that they get to kind of hold each other. So it's really just practicing other models all the time in a daily way, instead of just at the end way. And I think that invites us all to be in more connection with each other in a more communicative and like step-by-step kind of microdosing way.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's great. And by the way, you were only you mute for like a second, so we got, it was an accidental button hit, probably. But also so people know, we have a little bit less than 30 minutes left together. So those of you in the audience, please just either raise your hand in the through the reaction function and your buttons at the bottom, or just add in the chat if you want to talk, or just send us questions in the chat, and Pete and I will kind of bring them in. But also Devynn and Gabriel, if you want to look, you're free to, but you don't have to. We can just also do that. But we want to make sure that you get to talk with our artists today.
Yeah, and by the way, with the chat, we will do the best we can. The chat is so overwhelming and so beautiful right now, so we'll do the best we can to find the questions in the chat. But if we skip your question, please feel free to just remind us. And I guess I just wanted to follow up for a minute before we do that, which is I think what the two of you were saying about spirituality here, and the kind of creative notion of spirituality that is being developed, I think is something really important, really fits into the questions or the things that you raise about decolonization as well, right? And it makes me think too about a lot of what, when I go into a setting like this, a lot of what I think about comes from the AIDS activist movement, and what the two of you are saying reminds me of some of the artists in that movement. It reminds me of David Wojnarowicz. It reminds me of Rotimi Fani Coyote, of ways in which they are also developing this sense of spirituality, right? That they are creating something. I think Pedro said, that we don't exactly have these traditions, but of course we do have these traditions. We just have them from different pieces, right? Different areas, and so I think so I think what they were doing was trying to build from the different areas that they were coming from, whether it was a sort of alternatives to Catholicism in Wojnarowicz's case, or Yoruba religion in Fani Coyote's case, and so so I guess God, I don't even know if I have a question here, but I was just thinking about the way in which spirituality relates to a kind of queer decolonial movement that that I see here, and also relates very much to activism, right? And relates very much to the way in which activism, you know, critiques these critiques nations, crosses borders in different sorts of ways, which also is something that relates closely to Pedro's work. So anyway, I don't know if that's a question, but I you know, if folks want to reflect on the relationship between spirituality, decolonialism, and activism.
I think, yeah, again, I want to be in a conference with all of you. I feel like there's so much here. I do think I can just touch on that. I think one of my practices right now that's woven into my nursing, my body work, my ritual work, my performance work, which really is all kind of one sphere now, is returning to traditional medicine and traditional practices and knowledge, which I think Indigenous people are always working towards and striving towards. And I feel like striving is really the word I am meaning, because it's really like, it can feel sometimes like a big push against what's actually being placed on our bodies. So, and you know, I know right now, land back is a huge movement that's being popularized and on Instagram now, which is strange and great. But I think when folks are asking me, like, where do I begin? I think is a big question. Like, how do I begin a spiritual practice, an art practice, better care for my body or other people near me? I think I do a lot of teaching around sounding and listening, because I think we're so disconnected from our bodies. Before you get to the moment of making a huge artwork or preparing to make one, I think just like being in a daily practice of listening to the space around you and to the elements around you. And then furthermore, for me, it's been a practice of the last 12 years tending to my actual tiny little Brooklyn piece of land that's a garden. And over 12 years, learning how to seed things, failing at it, and then learning and having them be my teacher and then being, sorry, you need a little bit more light. Okay, and let me move you over. And that's like a small way. If we can't fully have land back, which is a multiplicitous of meaning around returning actual land to Indigenous people, I can get to know the land like really right outside my home and practice honoring it and nourishing it and having it nourish me with its teachings every single day as a way to then move outside of that space and look at like my neighborhood, and then outside my neighborhood, the city that I'm in, and just like slow growing my relationship. And as an Indigenous person, you know, I think that there's this assumption that we all have it figured out, but we too are constantly decolonizing and pushing back against things that are placed on our bodies again. So yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Gabriel, did you want to add something to that?
No, I guess that when Pete had mentioned activism, the first thing that came to my mind was the fact that when artists work, or when we work on representing like queer folks or folks of color, we're automatically seen as activists, mostly, I guess, because we're choosing to work with communities that, again, like are often disenfranchised. So that's like automatically becomes, you become an activist, which I think I had a hard time when I first started this project and people were calling me that, because I'm like, in my mind, an activist is somebody who's out on the streets doing things, you know, like doing actions. And I'm in the background just taking portraits and putting the work out there. But as I started working over the years, and I started feeling a little more comfortable calling myself that, or being okay with other people labeling me an activist, because I guess it is, in a sense, I am being an activist by amplifying the voices of other activists or other identities, you know, that are often othered and erased.
Jolie raised her hand. So Jolie, I don't know if you want to turn your camera on or stay up. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, first of all, I just want to, and my head is still just exploding from this amazing pair of presentations and the conversation. So really a ton to think with here. I would love to hear, because all four of you touched in one way or another of elements of this. One of the things that we've been wrestling with, again, to return to this question of how we describe communities of care, is thinking about how do we come up, I mean, the revaluing care part of it came from the fact that the way that care, this is this old feminist question, right? Which is that this is all of this labor and attention and time and expertise that often just gets completely erased from certainly the way we understand anything like an economy, but it even is invisibilized. The pandemic has been interesting in that it's made visible a lot of care labor that otherwise has been sort of elided from our understanding. But the project started, and listening to you, I think we're even more on the right track with wanting to think in even more radical ways than just making it visible. That is to say, how could we reimagine a careful society, a society that's centered care and relationality and well-being over sustainability, certainly over things like productivity or efficiency or whatever the things that we tend to focus on. I think even in this moment have tended to be centerpieces. And so I guess in particular thinking about pulling some threads here, Pedro's observation about the ways that individuality gets often centered over relationality, and if there's ways that we can make that more central. I was really fascinated by Pete's thinking about, I think in conversation, or maybe this was Pedro as well, sorry, about the question about how different images conjure care in these, particularly in your two presentations. And then in particular, Devynn's returning us again and again to decoloniality and how do we decolonize the question of care, and the idea that decolonizing and queering care might be overlapping or akin in some way. I thought I was really fascinated by. So I would love to hear actually all four, if you're interested in it. Thinking out loud a bit about what I really appreciate this sort of Devynn's pointing us to some daily actions that we might think about. What it might look like, the solution, the repertoire of solutions up until now has really centered on a kind of neoliberal repertoire of market solutions, technological solutions, individual or heteronormative household-based solutions. And I would love to hear any of you think out loud, or frankly, anyone from the audience think out loud about what sorts of radical alternatives we might come up with that would be centering care in not just in the ways of, we need more childcare or whatever, which we do, but really centering care. Yeah, someone just put reparations. Yes, like what are some of the things that we might do to center care more explicitly? And that's a wide open question.
Did you want to go, Pedro?
No. I will just say I'll let you all go, but I'm also looking at the chat. There's a side chat going on that I think we should bring into the main chat. So why don't you go at this first, and then I'll bring that in.
Great. Yeah. So many questions within questions. I think practicing security and safety with queer and trans bodies that don't model like production and profit and value based on how much money we're making and how much we're contributing to society, which is a big statement. How do we actually do it? I think somewhere along the line, I was thinking about, Gabriel, you said, activism, what is activism? I think there's so much social media right now that's like alarmist and big and educating each other. It's very exciting and good and overwhelming, of course. And, I've been on the streets, I've done lots of that kind of activism. And I think lately, maybe nursing has completely changed me. I think also putting out there, like you're doing, and like I think all of us are doing in some way, putting out there different visual, different education, different ways that we want to see, instead of like, this is the traumatic fact that just happened this morning. That is important to know. And then what do we want to see? Because I also want to see, oh my God, these beautiful images. Here's how we're being celebrated. Oh, here's how we're celebrating this person who's not just like working a million hours a week for this organization. And even, this organization making tons of money because they're hiring BIPOC people to speak for their organization. There's a lot of ways that I think we can just keep insisting on what we want to see and hear and feel and understand, and just keep putting it out there daily, because I think that talking about recentering my own body, recentering my own nervous system, that helps me kind of be with the knowledge of, there's no looking away from the truth of what's going on, but putting out there and connecting with you all just like today, and putting out there what I do want to see, what kind of world I do insist on.
I also want to,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, just a quick word. I wanted to say to also reiterate something that Devynn said before that I actually think speaks to Jolie's question, which is that Devynn, you talked about slowing time, right? And and we often talk in academia about queer temporality, but but thinking about this in a very specific way of slowing time, of allowing the rituals to take hold, it seems to me is a way of operationalizing the kind of care that that Jolie's asking about. And I have no idea how that relates to policy or whatnot, but just thinking about the slowing of time in that way, I think is really important here.
Yeah, I was thinking about also like all of the mutual aid that's been happening during the pandemic, and how like we're taking care of each other because the government is not doing enough. So we're like looking out for our own communities. Like I'm thinking about Cheyenne Dorosho, who is the head of Glitz, which it's a trans organization. They were, through mutual aid projects, they were able to buy their own building and are housing Black trans women, which I think it's really radical and like really inspiring. And yeah, it's beautiful to see. And I don't know that would have happened even 2 years ago or something.
Yeah, before I kind of add my kind of thoughts on that, like I want to bring in, like, I think it's Dulce Aguirre and Rachel Piper have been talking about, I think this was in reference to when, Gabriel, you were talking about originally not seeing yourself as an activist and kind of feeling uneasy about that because you were just making portraits. And so Dulce that made her think of Darnella Fraser and this whole idea of the recording of our history as activism, right? And then Rachel added that this idea of resistance, but also Rachel kind of asked us to think in the chat whether we can think of care as not being an interruption to life, but rather life itself. So perhaps we can think of that together. One piece that I would like to add, even if it's yet another conference topic, is this idea that I think, and maybe it connects to what Jolie was saying, and certainly part of feminist critiques of healthcare, but with the topic of queering care, I think both in art and Western thought, but especially in care, perhaps because it's so associated with the body and body-to-body relations, there's this incredibly bogus but pernicious and pervasive claim of the asexual practitioner, like this notion that, and of course it's not at all, there's all kinds of sexist and gender tropes going on in medicine, right, as well as in art, but there's still this notion, same in the Catholic Church, right, there's this notion that priests, like that the practitioners of faith are asexual. Of course they're not, right? When you switch your lens and you refuse to see them as asexual, and you don't buy into this whole notion of male celibacy, right? Because it's a kind of a myth anyhow, then all of a sudden queering really offers something great, regardless of how people identify in terms of their sexuality. It puts in the foreground this problem that the culture of care has had for centuries, So I'm curious whether we can think of that in a more practical rather than just theoretical way. And I know you do that, Devynn, directly in your work, right? But perhaps all of us in terms of Jolie's challenge to us,
Yeah, I think I'm not muted. No, yeah. I think thinking of thinking of care practitioners as erotic beings of one way or another. And I wouldn't say they're not asexual. There are asexual, there are asexual practitioners, but but there are also sexual practitioners that they are erotic beings in one way or another, and that relates to their conceptualization of themselves and relates to the way in which they interact with others. I think that's an important point in thinking about the ways in which care can be enacted, and not thinking of us as simply defensive about issues related to sexuality.
I think Dulce has a stronger way of putting it in the chat if you want to look at it. Jack, I don't want to interrupt, but Jack and Nelson has their hand raised. Yeah. Do you want to speak? Yeah. I just asked you to. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Just gonna take a leap here. Gabriel and Devynn, thank you so much for your work, and witnessing your work today and your words, I notice in my own body just kind of huge waves and walls of grief arising around a fractured sense of belonging, or even the impossibility of belonging. And I just wonder if either or both of you might feel moved to speak about how belonging or not belonging rises up in your processes around your work.
I could start. I think growing up queer, brown, and immigrant in this country, I never felt like I belonged, and I think that's why chosen family, or like creating my own community and relying on my community, has always been such a big part of that, of like constructing my own belonging, and like making work with what I have, and in a way that's how a lot of my artwork has been or my feelings have been transferred onto my work, where I'm also like gathering other folks who didn't feel like they belonged, and creating like a canon of folks who are creating these communities in their local communities. So I think that's what I'm thinking about when I think about that question.
Great question, Jack. Thanks for it. For me, also growing up queer and brown and trans, I think if you're a queer trans person, you're my family, period. That's just how it rolls. And we teach each other, how to like unlearn all the shit that's put on us through our lifetimes, past, now, and in the future. And it's not always pretty. We can be pretty brutal with each other also, as we kind of unpack all of the systems that are within us. So but that's part of family, from what I understand. I don't have a traditional blood family in the way that some people do. So I only know chosen family, and I just know that I've internalized a lot, and we practice on each other and with each other, and we kind of grow in that way as family. And as far as my work, I don't know, all of the work that I'm doing is really an invitation to be invited, to be belonging, because I really reject the like specifically nurse as hero thing. I don't want to be a hero. I too, of course, am grieving. In fact, I'm quite traumatized by being a COVID nurse, and I'm not, all of us have been in such different ways. And I want to be with all of us, because this is not a moment to kind of isolate and be in that individualistic old patterning that we kind of all grew up in. And this is a moment of belonging. And I don't go by that, like, this is the great unifier thing. COVID is not the great unifier. I think it's the great separator. And I think it's up to us. And I think we as queer folk really have some skills in inviting in and making that a different family system. So to understand that all the separations and disparities and kind of come together to talk about how to care for one another, and especially as things are failing continually, how to take care of each other.
So if there aren't any other questions, I actually think that Jack's question is the perfect question to end on. It is so central to the questions we were raising today around communities and who gets in and out of communities and who is invited into our communities. And I've just been so inspired by everyone on the panel, but also all of the engagement from in the chat, which I'm really glad that we recorded this and I can go, because it's for people who didn't have a chance to read the chat all along. It's I just feel like it's going to be okay now. Like it's this has been really wonderful to see all these connections, and I'm really excited to see where we go from here. I want to also, before we go, give one more shout out to Lauren Henschel, who is really the intellectual author of this event today, and is an amazing artist in her own right, and has been a wonderful partner in this whole project. So thank you again to all the panelists and to all of the participants who came on for this event, because it's been really fabulous. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been quite an honor to be with you all. Thanks for all who joined us on a Friday, and for all these questions, and for Pete and Pedro for holding us. Thanks for Duke University. I could go on and on. I'm just so grateful.
Yeah, thanks everyone again for being patient and your questions.
I also just want to make sure that everyone goes and checks out all of the artists that are in the exhibition. Unfortunately, we could not have everyone here to speak, but there's some really incredible work from all over the world in this exhibition, visualizingcare.com. And we will continue these conversations throughout the year, kind of trying to get at the same question from many different perspectives. So make sure to send us your email, tune in. And thank you all so much. The messages that I have been getting personally and in the chat are so inspiring. People are just really feeling so held, and that's really what this is all about. So thank you so much.
Thank you.